Wilderness is the quickest exit I know from our own culture. But I mean, wilderness is where everything is other, you know, and except you're part of it. I really was moved by these animals. They're not only top of the food chain, but they're just a fascinating creature. And after all, there's an animal out there that can kill and eat you anytime it wants to, though it seldom does, you know. That's a real teacher. It's humility. It's kind of an enforced humility at first. But, you know, humility is a great teacher. It's really the emotional posture behind reason, I believe, is humility. People here and everywhere else, they're terrified of things they don't know. And increasingly, we know less and less about the animal kingdom. My name's Doug Peacock, and we're about 30 miles north of Yellowstone Park in Montana. And the Yellowstone River runs down there, and I'm in a valley between the Absaroka Mountains and the Galton Range over here. It's occupied grizzly country. I founded Round River Conservation Studies, which I was chairman of the board for 25 years. In that 25 years, by working with indigenous people, mainly people in coastal British Columbia, the Yukon, and Northwest Territories, we saved over 30 million acres. Or, you know, we either helped preserve as homelands, because these are partnerships, you know, in traditional territories with people who wanted the same thing that we did. Just basically no gold mines, no logging, and no roads. I left them to found Save the Yellowstone Grizzly because I was in on the first lawsuit. You know, when Federal Wildlife Service delists the grizzly, as they do about every 10 years, and we have to take them to court collectively then, and we've won. We kicked ass on both cases because they're pretty sloppy when they just count bears and their counts aren't quite kosher. But it's threatening to do it again. I'm really sick of going to court. I'd rather blow up a dam or a bridge or something, you know, get a little satisfaction. You know, most of the bears are shot by ignorant people. You know, they see a bear and they think they have to kill it. You know, I've been charged by 3 dozen grizzlies, mostly mothers with cubs. No bears ever touched me, so I'm comfortable in that situation. But I mean, I don't believe there's any such thing as killing a grizzly in self-defense. Well, I fell into the grizzly den, so to speak. I spent a couple years as a Green Beret medic in Vietnam. Saw a lot of combat, but what I saw more of was just collateral damage. You know, I didn't come out of there clean. I really got burned out after 14, 15 months or something like that. So when I got back, it wasn't very long either. I got back at the end of March, and I was no good around people. You know, I went to see my family, but I was distant, which is kind of a weak description. I was really kind of wildly crazy. I just didn't show anybody anything. And as soon as the snow started melting, I went out to Arizona. I bought a Jeep, went out to Arizona, and started working my way north through the mountains. And, you know, by middle of the summer, I was up in the Wind River Range, you know, on the east side, you know, and what I had up there was a malaria attack. I had quite a bit of malaria, and I said, hell, I've been up there. And this particular one was a 20-day trip. I had to get out of there because I knew it was coming. I went down, got in my Jeep when I was, you know, feverish, but lucid enough to drive up to Yellowstone, where I'd been before. I went back into this thermal area and had a little hot creek, you know, And so I knew I could soak, and so I had this fantasy that I was gonna go up there with a fever of 105. Actually, it was 105.6, my last recording before I went out of my mind, you know. Well, I don't know how long I was in my sleeping bag sweating with this high fever, and I go out of my tent, and there's grizzly sign everywhere. Now, I don't know much about grizzly bears at this time, but there was grizzly sign everywhere, you know, tracks and scat, and, you know, they were definitely around, and I finally started seeing them. The first grizzlies that I actually saw, I was soaking in a tub, you know, but I looked up and there's a mother grizzly with 2 yearling cubs, you know, and she's just eating grass. But I said, you know, I didn't know much about grizzlies. I just know, you know, you ain't supposed to get close to mothers with cubs. And I said, oh shit, I gotta do something. And I didn't know what to do. So I looked around me and, you know, there's little trees, and I'm still thinking climbing trees is a real bad idea, but I didn't know that then. So I waited until they were kind of looking away, and I stood up and bolted for a lodgepole pine tree that wasn't very big. And I slammed into it, I tripped, I blacked out is what happened, you know, from the whirlpool-like effect. And just as I blacked out, my forehead hit the tree. You know, I'm reaching for it, but I don't quite make it. And I got a huge gash in my forehead and blood just streaming down my face, you know. But I was terrified. So I managed to scramble up this tree that's, you know, that's only 4 feet away or something like that. And I get up to the top of it, and I find out that it's not much bigger than a Christmas tree. And, you know, and my ass is dangling in jaw reach of this grizzly family. And so I get up there, and the grizzly family wanders around, and they finally come right up, you know, within 15 feet of me up the tree, by the creek. I don't think they ever looked up, but they were right there. And they knew, you know, there was some species of silly sparrow clinging to the top of this Christmas tree. And anyway, that was my first really memorable encounter with grizzly bears in Yellowstone. I mean, I really was moved by these animals. You can't ignore grizzly bears if you're gonna, you know, live and camp alone in grizzly country, and that's exactly what I needed for my own, you know, health, so to speak. And just the fact that they're in the same wild country or ecosystem with you makes, you know, commands you to pay close attention to everything, you know, birds and buffalo and anything else. You got to know where the grizz are, because you don't want to run into one close, and you don't want to get close to a mother bear with young. That's the most dangerous situation. And that same winter, I went down to Tucson, got a job as a hippie mailman for a few months. I think the longest I ever had a job. I'm not, you know, I'm a great foe of the work ethic. I never had real jobs very often or very long. But I met Ed Abbey that winter.
I think we're morally justified to resort to whatever means are necessary in order to defend our land from destruction.
We just started taking trips together, and you know, in the wild and mainly in the desert, and we got in a lot of trouble, but that was okay. I drove my motorcycle. Bill Eastlake lived way the hell on the east side in what looked like wilderness then, but it's full of, you know, it's full of development now. But you know, he lived off a dirt road. I didn't know, and you got to be careful, you know, in the West about knocking on someone's door when it's dark. You know, you could get blown away. So, you know, I finally located what I thought was up. I kind of looked through the windows, and it was okay. But I was really cold. So I knocked on that door, Bill let me in, and I took a seat on a couch. There were a bunch of writer types there, I suppose, you know, poet types. And the guy I sat next to had a long black beard, and we talked about mountain lions, on which he had recently published in Life magazine. And it was Ed. And the way I met him is, you know, we were just sitting on a couch, and I smoked tobacco then. And I had a little, baggie of bugler tobacco and some Z's, to roll it in. And I got it out and, filled it, made a little joint like a cigarette and rolled it up and I put it up to light it with a match, but my hand was shaking too much, I couldn't do it. So this guy reached over with a lighter and gave me a light. That was Ed Abbey. Well, he told me what he was writing, I didn't pay much attention that, he was basing a character on me. I just hardly noticed. He always did it because writers steal. And he's always writing stuff down in his notebook. But in the back of my pickup, I had this old field manual that I'd gotten in Vietnam from the Special Forces. It was, improvised explosive and weapons and all that kind of stuff, but he was really interested in it, so I gave it to him, and I told you how to mix, diesel and, detergent and stuff like that, So, so I got a little cross training in demolition, so I just knew just enough to advise Ed on the technical stuff and then give him this manual. Finally, almost a year later, he had me do the technical editing on the Monkey Wrench Gang before, he turned it in as a book, and not the literary stuff, because he's very sensitive. And we had a cantankerous relationship, but a real one for 20 years. And, I was with him when he died, and I buried him. So, that kind of a friendship. And so I read the whole thing, and just corrected things about repelling and just little things, And he actually educated himself pretty well. I mean, he learned more about diesels and stuff like that, caterpillars, than I ever knew, And that one scene with him rappelling off a hill, I'd never heard of anything like that, even though he based it on my Jeep. I wasn't rich enough to afford a winch, as I called it, or a wench. But it was such a good scene. I said, shit, I don't know, leave it in. What we did paled. I mean, we did nickel dime stuff. Cut down a lot of billboards. And, but the heavy equipment thing, we had to be real careful around construction sites, especially the ones were up in Utah. So mainly it was talk, as I describe it. But we were out there causing as much mischief as we could. And we didn't have a very big team, and it was, it was slothful and almost recreational, And we'd go out with our, depends what we were going after, but we'd go out with our, saws and axes and sledgehammers and look for stuff. Abandoned or, resting oil sites were vulnerable. I remember on our way up, take one of our first big hikes in Escalante, Ed and I ran into a hole that's been, just recently capped, and there's nobody around. And we went up to it and found a spanner and took the cap off, or I think, yeah. And there were a bunch of used up diamond drill bits, so we put all those down there. And things like that, much junk as we could get. And, it felt good, but it wasn't very big scale monkey wrenching. I welcome the value of the expansion of the dialogue. Once monkey wrenching and Earth First came in, what they did that I think their best effect was they broadened the dialogue. They made Sierra Club look real reasonable, And I think that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. And you just got to watch and terrorism and all that kind of stuff. It's just a word, but You know, you need to be responsible for your actions and the consequences of your actions, including going to the slammer. The way I've chosen to kind of preach and write books is, you know, to appreciate that kind of otherness, you know, in the world, anywhere, is to put yourself on an equal plane with wild animals. You know, they're not put here for us to kill or eat or dominate. And, you know, it's to escape from, you know, Western dominion, which is basically all born of Abrahamic religions. It's very much anti-capitalism. You know, if you read my books and articles, you run into that. You know, the fatal flaw is pretending that we can have endless economic growth on a planet with finite resources. We haven't accepted that yet, and we're not going to beat climate change without some attitude thereabouts. And so that's why I try to teach the value of having a few grizzlies around, and and the kind of habitat they need to survive. It's not just that. I've been in Africa and Asia, all over the place, jaguar country down in South America and Central America, and I have a preference for those animals. I think I really enjoy it. It's just such a goddamn thrill. And also, you got to keep looking over your shoulder. It's good for you, is what I came up with after 50 or more years. It's Doug, this is all right.
Do you think one solution to climate change and environmental protection is fighting capitalism with capitalism?
I don't really. No, for one thing, I don't see any geoengineering solutions to this one. It's just cuts right to our hearts and souls, and it's driven by human greed. And as long as we stick with that, humans are not immune to being on an endangered species list. And this is a big, we're leaving you a shit world. I'm so sorry. But, it's the beast of our time. And it's just come just as I'm leaving and you're showing up to put your foot in the door. And that's going to be the test. It's, I don't see where you can't, I don't see how we can fight this without some soul searching of our own, and find a little humility at once. I don't think you can clink it, and it's terrible. But if we can't stop, there's a kind of a chain reaction that keeps going. I don't know anything more primary than protecting wild rivers. I just love the flow, and it softens me. Dams are really an obscenity, and a stamp, an indecent stamp upon something really valuable, and something so. It's the center of a natural ecosystem. Anywhere we go, this place, I have to go down to the river to see grizzly tracks in the fall. I only quit fishing last year because with heat like this, you cannot catch and release a trout without half the time killing it. There's so much serious, heartfelt support behind taking out dams right now, undamming them, whether you dismantle them. I like to see a few blowing just for the ceremony, but I'll take it either way. And man, we need to feed that. That's why I wrote that article, to get to a lot of people. But it's got everything in it. You talk about capitalism and all those greedy sons of bitches. The damming of rivers and the use of water is just the center of this whole greed thing, which is behind capitalism, which is behind, climate change. So I'll support that to the end of my days, which is not very far down the road anymore. That's where we use our desert water, and it's all to feed cows. And cows are just an international pain in the ass. They're the excuse for, if we lose the Amazon and we appear to be, on the catch-up side of it, that could be it. I mean, these are guys, the technical experts, they say when they collapse the Amazon, as a sequestering force could end with this, they're just clear cutting so much and burning so much, and it's all for cows, again. And they tell me that that could be it for the Amazon. And I don't, I'm not a physicist or a scientist, except that I read a lot. And it sounds like we're right on the tipping point right now. I'm not going to say this. We came that close to solving some problems.
What is the government's role in protecting wilderness?
Well, it should be a total responsibility, but they've got to value it first, and they are lobbied so hard by big money. The government's a can of worms, and it's a sieve through which really good ideas are caught and tossed out. And you just, you got to watch who you put in office, because they can do terrible things. And their ability to do great things, in my mind, is much more limited than their ability to do terrible things. And just one bad election could sink us. I mean, I think it's that serious. If you lose the climate war, I believe it'll be, the end of the conscious, I think if we lose that one, I think it's curtains, probably. I don't say that publicly or to many people, but we're so close on this one. And, your generation, man, it's, the only hope we have, I think, is, the young people of Montana sued the goddamn state because they don't believe in climate change. We've got Montana's best poacher lives across the river. He mainly harvests wolves, but he'll shoot anything. And just for example, the governor of Montana, Gianforte, shot a wolf that this guy had trapped and left overnight. He even gave it water to keep it alive. And the governor flew in the next day, shot the wolf in the trap.
What the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. And about, let's see, that same winter, maybe 7 months later, this same guy crossed mountain lion tracks on the snow, went and got the dogs, put the dogs on them. They treed the mountain lion, and again, he called the governor, who waited for the next day to come up and shoot the lion out of the tree. So that's what I'm dealing with here, so there's politics with everything.
That's horrible.
It is horrible. doesn't raise so many eyebrows among, about half the population here, which in the West is really, it's Trumpian, they can't kill enough predators. Wolves, grizzlies, lions, coyotes, pretty much in that order. And so, they pass laws that are really hostile on grizzlies. Like, they've got a law that they did pass that allows anybody to shoot a grizzly, a threatening grizzly, and they don't define threatening. So that means, if a grizzly walked through here and looked at a cow, anybody could shoot him. And the only thing hanging that law up on is the fact that the federal government controls the management of grizzly bears, which is a threatened species, under the Endangered Species Act. And the states can't, that law would not be active until the bear is delisted, taken off the Endangered Species Act. And that's what I'm fighting. That's probably the number one right now, number one threat, because automatically it means that that there'll be a trophy hunting season. That's what it means. If you give management over to the states, and that means Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. Montana has the most bears, and Wyoming has, they're on the south side of Yellowstone. And then Idaho has, I had to sue Idaho 2 years ago because, they sent their wardens out. There was a grizzly family right across the river, a mother with 2 cubs that never got in trouble. And she did. She went down and ate apples, but she never got into garbage. In Gardner. Gardner is a bad town in controlling its garbage. It's always, people are offered all kinds of free deals, and they just prefer to bait the bears, and it's a big sump for bear deaths. So Montana located the bears over to West Yellowstone. The bears went down south to the west side of the Tetons, and they killed the mother and the cub, and they sent a guy out to kill a third little cub. And these bears, they never threatened anybody. They were almost perfect bears. Anyway, without a permission from the feds, which is like, the feds call it a take, it means kill. They went and killed that last bear, early in the morning, despite the fact that they were told by the feds not to, because he didn't fit any bad, conflict category or criterion. And so I sued him, and it's still in the feds make note of it too, that wasn't the best deal, but we got them to sign a deal with the Federal Wildlife Service, basically saying they wouldn't do it anymore. But of course, it's not too satisfying to win a lawsuit. We're going to need all the help we can get. I'm going to need personal help in reaching out to the American people, because they're going to be doing, the important votes. It's not like we're the only, we don't have to be, we don't have to be that self-conscious, but we're going to have to fight this delisting. God, I'd like to see a campaign really just directed to people from 18 up, because they're out there. They can make a real difference. And it's climate change that's, it affects everybody alive.